Hi, my name is Galen Culver, and this has to be one of the strangest public speaking engagements I've ever done. The plus side, I don't have to really dress up. On the negative side, it's a little strange just talking to a camera and not a group of you. So I apologize that I'm just imagining your faces right now. But I wanted to, usually when I come and talk to people, I bring a few stories, and I think the subject is conservation, so I wanted to choose a nice backdrop here at Boomer Lake State Park in Stillwater. I happen to be up here on assignment. But on the subject of conservation, I've spent 29 years now. In the summer of 1991, they started me off, the leaders at Channel 4 at the time, thought it would be good to have a feature reporter go out and shoot stories, and they named that umbrella that I was to operate under, "Is this a great state or what?" And it was a big one, as I was to discover. I came to appreciate stories on history, stories on interesting people, and I came to the conclusion that everyone has a story, and I am just sort of picking the lowest hanging fruit of those, the strange ones, the ones that make us smile, or the ones that we remember as we go through life. But another one of the main stories I've always really liked are stories that bring me outside, that take me out to a place that's relatively quiet and peaceful. And you don't find those places in Oklahoma unless some form of conservation has been observed in some way. And I think of conservation in terms of either restoration, preservation of wilderness areas, or just plain good stewardship. And someone who's clearly taken care of the land and the gifts that it offers in order to feed us all or provide water for us all. And in choosing the stories that I was going to bring to you and kind of show, I kind of wanted to, I think since 1991 I'm up in the 4,000s. I might not be in the 5,000 range there, but I'm somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 stories, and a great deal of those touch on the subject of conservation, or on stewardship, or on a connection to the land. And I realize what a gift that is. So I did bring some stories, and I have a list of them. And I don't know, the first one I chose just to show you how long it's been since I've been at this. I shot in 1992 on a guy who moved to Oklahoma from another state far away, and happened to settle in Enid, and fell in love with the prairie there and what the prairie could produce in terms of wildflowers.
I think it must be a combination of these wildflower plots in Oklahoma City parks and the fact that we've had so much rain this spring. I've really noticed wildflowers this year. Yes, I have. Is that all right? Jeez. Anyway, I know this guy in Enid who's noticed them all his life. In fact, he's made wildflowers his life's project.
I see beauty in them.
No matter where he is, Herman Ditrick is always looking. Wildflowers in the green grasses of spring are his targets. Herman spends his days in the fields near Enid, capturing the beauty he could never find in his former home.
And being out in the open, like we are right now, compared to what I had to do where I came from back in Chicago, this is what I've always dreamt about, is working out in the field like this and being out in the open air.
Herman grew up in Chicago, then followed a dream to Oklahoma after his wife passed away 3 years ago. His dream, his fields, his flowers. Herman is now a sort of researcher for the Johnston Seed Company. He grows wildflowers for a living. From golden yarrow to clover, Herman sees the beauty and also the bucks.
There's thousands of plants out here that have been identified somewhat, but they haven't been identified in the way I might like to identify them, to use them in beautification of homes or into window trimming or any type of decorative materials.
A former florist and horticulturist himself, Herman's flowers are grown to be dried. The grasses and blooms he harvests are then rearranged in a field of their own by florists around the country.
Everything in this arrangement right here has been grown in Oklahoma. And some of it has been in the wild, and some of it we cultivate ourselves. And
Herman doesn't do much arranging anymore. Most of the time, you'll find him outside in his fields, nurturing a crop most other farmers would probably try to destroy. And always, he's chasing his dreams. Galen Culver, News Team 4. Is this a great state or what?
Okay, keep in mind that was 1992, and I look a little different. The miles have taken their toll, but I'm still at it. I don't know if Herman Ditrick is, but I know the wildflowers still grow where he gathered them. The next story I thought I'd show you is from just a couple of years ago, and has to do with a unique contest that has existed in Oklahoma for a number of years, where high school students come and basically look at dirt for an entire day.
But just know we're going to the farthest pitch you see on top of that hill.
They gathered on what might seem like a pretty boring piece of ground. More than 700 high school students from 33 states, including 10 different teams from Oklahoma,
Each contestant, you need to go to the west end of this field.
came here to look at the stuff that grows and, as soil judge Greg Scott puts it, the stuff it grows in.
The students will come out here and look at this site, and they'll judge the slope, depth of the topsoil, they'll look at the texture, and they'll have to come up with a recommendation for how to use that land in a way that will conserve it.
This is a unique contest for FFA and 4-H kids like Randy Bray from Wetumpka. She didn't raise a cow or pig to judge. She studied soils and subsoils, depth, slope, crop suitability, or whether you could safely put a house on it. A team from around Thomas, Oklahoma told me the slopes were trickiest out here.
You could miss them really easily if you weren't really paying attention.
Randy's predictions about her score varied from hot to cold.
Either really good or really bad. There's no in between.
Organizers and a couple of hundred volunteers put on 3 different contests out here. In range judging, competitors had to identify plants and habitat. The next hill over, students had to evaluate soil.
Textures were a little challenging.
Soil conservationist Don Bartolini has been watching this process for the better part of 60 years.
I started in 1961. Oh, it's fun, or I wouldn't be doing it.
Competing teams spend several days the first week of May digging in Oklahoma soil. Some even take home a jar of it as souvenirs or as study material for the next time they all meet here to play dirty. Near El Reno, Galen Culver, News 4. Is this a great state or what?
I shot a lot of stories on farmers growing interesting crops in Oklahoma over the last close to 30 years now. And as a photographer, I look for the prettiest pictures. And the winner for that, at least in my memory, came from a few years ago when I went up to Buffalo and happened to be there just before the harvest of 20 acres of purple prairie clover. And it was a good year for that crop.
That's amazing. I mean, it's just amazing.
He's still a farmer, hostage to the elements, pessimistic even in a wet season. But George Shaw still can't help but appreciate this crop for its unique beauty.
This might be the prettiest dirt road in Oklahoma right now, I'm thinking.
I think you're right.
A searcher might find purple prairie clover growing by itself in the pastures of Harper County, but Farmer Shaw figured out how to make it a carpet.
One plant, they come up from the crown every year, and they'll shoot out from the crown, and each one, depending on the rainfall, will produce, it'll have little runners come out. Out here where they say there's nothing, there's everything.
George isn't the only creature who likes this stuff. Bees and butterflies flock to it. Horny toads and jackrabbits like it for cover.
It's helping nature is the biggest deal.
Sometime in mid-July, after the blooms drop off, Shaw will gather up the seed that normally drops to the ground, and he'll sell it. The prettiest cash crop you'll ever see.
A lot of people, they'll want to put it in their flower gardens at their house or for different mixes for butterflies.
Shaw had to convince his dad to let him plant a little 7-acre plot 20 years ago. These days he grows clover, echinacea, Illinois bundleflower, and blue stem on the family farm.
My great-grandfather farmed this field here, and another field over here with a team of mules.
He has 20 acres here, a bright purple spot in the middle of green and brown. A secluded space, but this season as pretty a spot as you could find anywhere.
Really good crop. Haven't seen it look this good since '07.
Just ask the farmer, who's just about rolling in clover every time he looks. Near Buffalo, Oklahoma, Galen Culver, News 4. Is this a great state or what?
Whenever someone takes the time and the effort to invest in a piece of land that they own, there are roots that go down really deep, and I appreciate that. And so when I learned about a survey of the black farmers of Grady County, I had a good idea of the obstacles they faced in just owning land in the 1920s, and what it took to take care of it, and how it lasted through generations. And it was sort of an honor for me to sit down and talk to some of the people who lived that, and some of the historians who were documenting it.
And see, when I went to school,
their stories drift in the fog of Grady County's rural past.
and my brother Edgar,
Turner Hills.
they had a farm, and they lived on our farm for a while.
The voices recalling a different time when struggling for the American dream meant overcoming more than boll weevils and stubborn mules.
It was hard work. We started real early in the morning.
They were the Knowles, the Hicks, the Berries.
Okay. That's Wanda.
The Haydens and their 12 children, including Willard and his big sister Clara, now 95 years old.
My dad didn't have an education, but he had good common sense.
They were the African-American farmers of Grady County, the lucky ones, able to share crop and work extra jobs, earning enough to buy their own farms.
In 1921, he bought 10 acres, and he paid $10 for those 10 acres.
The Haydens eventually gathered up 140 acres near Ninnekah. Willard worked there on weekends with his 6 brothers.
My job was going chopping that cotton.
Historian Loretta Jackson spent years gathering the stories of Grady County's African-American heritage and of the black farmers whose pride in owning land passed down through every generation.
You're not renting. You own it. You own that ownership. Played a major role.
Joe Hayden worked his farm and a side job at the Chickasha Milling Company for 40 years. His advice was to keep a tight hold on that land. This is a copy of the original deed, which is still in the Hayden name, a producer of grass for cattle and a source of pride like good water that'll never run out. Near Chickasha, Galen Culver, News 4. Is this a great state or what?
My travels take me all over the state. I don't care if they don't get Channel 4 where I happen to be. I'm sort of constricted in my eyes by the borders of Oklahoma. So I go to the Panhandle if I need to, once a year usually. Go to Southeast Oklahoma. I'm glad Oklahoma City is sort of centered where it is, because I can usually get back and forth within a day, still make supper. But this year, earlier this spring, my travels took me to a farm just outside Leedy where Jimmy Emmons, a farmer there, was doing an interesting thing with his cover crop of alfalfa. He was mixing it in with crops that he had no intention of harvesting for himself or for profit, but to give away. And I thought that was kind of an interesting idea, considering that this spring has been challenging for a lot of people.
So this is a barley and wheat cover crop mix.
This year's cover crop is designed to put a little nutrients back into this plot of western Oklahoma soil.
There's squash in here. There's peas in here.
But Jimmy Emmons is about to plant up to 70 other plant varieties here too.
It's kind of neat.
He's been doing this on small plots of land he farms over the past few years, experimenting with a seed drill and kinds of plants you might find in your own backyard garden, just all mixed up.
There's like 35 or 37 different vegetables, plants that's edible in there, and then about another 30 that's just cover crops.
The idea was born from a conversation at the Oklahoma Conservation Commission.
I was the vice president of the conservation districts in Oklahoma at that time.
Adding vegetable crops to traditional cover crops might just feed more local people.
And if we partner with the regional food bank, if we could donate any of them vegetables, and how neat that would be.
Here's how it works. Jimmy plants his seed mix, then he flattens down the barley to form a protective mat.
We'll come in here now and we'll lay all this down, and so weeds can't grow through that.
Less than 3 weeks later, his 3-acre garden is producing fresh vegetables for nearby food pantries and community centers. No long transports or production needed.
This is a way that we can get back to locally grown, locally raised, very nutritious food that's healthy.
Jimmy's garden doesn't have rows. Some people have taken to calling these chaos gardens, though organizers do prefer other names. Picking requires hunting through the underbrush to find okra or cucumbers or melons, but there's a lot in there.
I know in the past here we've picked 1,000 pounds a day out of this 3 acres to sometimes 2,000 to 3,000 pounds.
Jimmy's parents and grandparents never ate store-bought veggies when they could pick from their own garden. These kinds of gardens, springing up in fallow farmland across the Great Plains, might just do the same job for a lot of other families who really need it right now. Near Leedy, Galen Culver, News 4. Is this a great state or what?
In August of 1993, I went down to a little place south of Holdenville. A guy there was farming catfish, had a series of ponds on his place, and we went out frog gigging, and it was one of the more memorable stories I ever shot. And he and I became friends. His name is Dave Wingo, and I appreciate him for the way he puts things, the way he sort of his brain forms sentences into words that are always memorable and usually pretty funny. So I called him up a couple of years ago and asked him how he was, and he had posted on Facebook a picture of an old hoe he found that belonged to his grandmother and that had a lot of meaning, and which sort of, to me, became emblematic of the kind of roots we've talked about, of stewardship, of preservation. And it's funny how so much emotion can be channeled through something that looks like a piece of junk, but isn't really at all.
Many a footprint up this hill.
Up a hill from the creek.
Come on.
This old dirt road is trampled down with a lifetime of footsteps for Dave Wingo.
That was back in, when they let kids grow up.
And now, his grandson Quinn.
I got to cram 15 or 20 years of granny and grandpa lessons into 5 or 6 weeks a year.
The road leads to his grandparents' house, to a big pecan orchard, and to a catfish pond we first visited in 1993.
Guy needs to always squeeze in just a little bit of time for frog hunting, because it sure won't be counted against him.
Back then, Dave's granny was still roaming this bottomland south of Spalding, Oklahoma on a 4-wheel gator. The product of a family with 8 boys and her, she grew up knowing how to do anything and how to teach anyone.
She cared about people.
The Wingo place surrounds Granny's old pecan orchard and woods along the South Canadian River. He runs cattle on it, farms a little, and in summers spends as much time as he possibly can teaching his grandkids the same kinds of things his granny taught him.
And she taught us we got to get up early and get our work done, I could say, because you never know what the day might bring.
It's been a few weeks now. Earlier this summer, Dave and his boys were cleaning up and they came across something that looked like trash. An old worn-out hoe with a broken handle, a useless garden implement to everybody but Granny, who wielded it with a marksman's precision.
That was my grandma's hoe, and she carried it around like a soldier did an M16.
Dave grew up weekends working and playing on this land, learning at the feet of his grandparents, watching and listening without really realizing he was.
I think about it quite a bit, and I said I wasn't going to get emotional when we talked about it, but it took 2 generations.
He's doing the same thing now, which is what makes this artifact so important to him.
It'll be something that my grandkids can have, and I'll tell them stories.
Near Spalding, Galen Culver, News 4. Is this a great state or what?
So there you have it. 6 stories that cover 29 years and a lot of miles. And here I am, still looking for beautiful places in Oklahoma, places where the land is taken care of, where it means something, where the wilderness might be preserved, species that call it home are preserved, and where I can just get outside and appreciate the kind of beauty that Oklahoma has to offer, and pay respect to the people who do their utmost to take care of it. And I have always considered Oklahoma and my job to be this wonderful place where people of all kinds invite me in with this big camera that happens to be in front of me, and let me ask sometimes probing, sometimes embarrassing questions, and tell their story. And I regard each story as a form of historical document, but also a real gift to me. And so when people kind of make fun of the byline of this story, the byline of this series, and say, yeah, is this a great state or what? I always tell them it's not a question, it's an exclamatory sentence. It's an exclamation. Is this a great state or what? And thanks for being here. I'm glad I'm here.